Hi, I'm Simon Baker, the Executive Chairman of the Online Marketplaces Group, and welcome to another vodcast. Today I'm chatting with Brian Boero from 1000 Watt Consulting. I've had the pleasure of knowing Brian for about 15 years, from his days when he worked at the Inman Group, now right through to running a consulting group that works with the US real estate industry. Brian has fantastic insights into what is happening in the US and the impact of the coronavirus is having on agencies, brokers, and the underlying portals. We started off the conversation by saying what has been the impact caused by the coronavirus on the US real estate industry.
The market has been severely impacted, but what is surprising, and the data that emerges daily sort of universally reflects this, is it hasn't been ground to a halt. So one would think, while effectively the entire country is sheltering in place, that the real estate market would simply stop. And that's not the case. I think Americans' desire to own a home is almost indestructible, even in these sorts of circumstances. So, for example, Redfin released a study yesterday of their data, which is in major markets across the US. And what they showed was that showings, people requesting to view the listings they're selling, were down 25%, only 25%, which I thought was remarkable. That's a huge drop, but it's still indicative of a lot of people still interested in seeing property. They also showed that pending sales year over year for the past 2 weeks were down just over 50%. Again, a precipitous drop, but that still means that half of the number of people who were in contract at this time last year are in contract this year. So transactions are still happening. People are still wanting to buy homes. They're looking to see homes. So the impact is severe, but there's still activity, remarkably.
So how is that occurring in a shelter-in-place type environment? What are people? How are the agents and the buyers in particular interacting in a way that is different from before?
Well, they're having to get pretty creative. Historically, properties bought sight unseen were only at the very high end, where somebody, a very wealthy person with a collection of homes, would see something they liked on the other side of the world and buy it. What we're seeing now is agents who are holding virtual open homes, right? So they'll fire that up on Facebook Live, invite people in to ask questions in real time. They'll show the people who want to see the home around the home. Agents doing video tours of homes narrated, and then all the technologies that have existed for 20 years, online floor plans, 3D tours, virtual tours, all of that stuff are just now being brought to the forefront. And agents here are making it happen. And you can still tour a home here in the San Francisco Bay Area where I am. Real estate has been deemed an essential service, as have, other markets have deemed it an essential service, which means that, under safe circumstances, and the rules vary from state to state and market to market, you can still get in to see a home if you're very careful. But it's happening. People are getting creative.
It's interesting because the US is one of the few places that is deemed real estate an essential service. Most other countries, it's not essential at all. A couple of interesting facts from my chat to the guys in Milan, which is sort of a place that's going through a lot of pain at the moment. Their lead gen is down about 25%. Transactions in the market are down about 25% as well. Similar numbers that are happening across the board. So they're finding ways to do it too, but they're not even allowed to leave the homes to go and even do a virtual tour or to do a video of a property. But they're still finding ways to stitch together images they already had to create virtual something unique to really connect with the buyer.
Yeah, it's really remarkable, and I think surprising to many people that there's still that level of activity persisting. Now, even though we have buyers and sellers in contract or pending as we stay here in the States, what we are seeing is that a lot of transactions are falling apart, right?
Okay.
Either because buyers get cold feet. We also have a problem now in the mortgage market here in the States that liquidity is an issue. And the secondary markets are in many ways seizing up. So those who originate mortgages are finding it hard to sell them. They therefore are tightening their underwriting standards, which limits access to credit to buyers. So funding's become an issue. Everything is extended, appraisals, inspections. So it's tougher to get a deal done. It takes longer. And that's, I can think, a story that's still sort of unfolding. How many of these
Right.
transactions that are active and pending right now are actually going to reach conclusion?
Yep. And do you think, I was reading some stats today about the US unemployment rates, another 5.5 million or so registered for
Yeah.
unemployment last week, which I can't remember the total. Is it 20 odd million more maybe?
We're now at 22 million
Okay.
Unemployed. And, the old adage really is that employment in many markets drives the housing market.
Yes.
And I think it would be short-sighted and naive to think that 22 million unemployed in the United States is not going to have lasting impacts on the housing market. We just, we're going to have to see. It's going
Yeah,
to be a
I
long road.
guess I think so. And I guess that coupled with a lot of people having pay cuts from 20, 30, 40%, I think will clearly put mortgage pressure on them. Any thoughts about the foreclosure market and what's going to happen there?
Well, I think we're on the very front end of that. So what the United States Congress did as part of their rescue plan is they basically said, you can get mortgage forbearance. You can stop paying your mortgage for up to 12 months. And lenders are starting to see the impact of that now. It's one of the reasons that we have a liquidity problem is investors don't want to buy mortgages that people aren't going to pay. So as people stop paying those mortgages, the question is, will they ever resume paying them? Will they just go into default? Will we have a resurgence in foreclosures? We haven't seen that yet, but the leading indicators suggest that that's going to happen to a significant degree.
So what's that mean for the industry? The agents, the brokers in the US? Are you seeing closures, people changing jobs, or they're still sort of quite vibrant and positive about what the outcome's going to be?
Well, the thing about the real estate business in the United States is that it is incredibly resilient, and some of the things that make it complicated, meaning that there are tons and tons of realtors, all of whom, or the large majority of which, I should say, are independent contractors, means that something like this doesn't just eliminate them from the rolls. If you look at the historical numbers of realtors in the United States, members of the National Association of Realtors, over the last 20 years, they peaked at about 2006 before the Great Recession at about 1.4 million realtors. They hit their bottom in 2012 at just a hair under a million. Between 2012 and 2020, they got back to over 1.4 million. So
a lot of
even
realtors.
a lot of realtors. So I don't expect realtors are going to go away. They're just going to be lots of unproductive realtors.
Yes.
Now you do see companies like Redfin who employ a employment model where agents or employees have already reacted. Redfin last week announced laying off, I think it was 40% of their agents. So they were immediately impacted.
So there's quick, swift movements by those markets. Any thoughts around Zillow, Open Door, and this iBuyer model? Because it's interesting. That sort of was the big flavor of town, I don't know, 6 to 8 weeks ago. Now what's the view?
That's yes. You're right. 6 weeks ago, that was the future of residential real estate in the United States. Now it's, I think, an open question. Um, Open Door, which was the pioneer of this model here, laid off 40%, I think it was 35% of their staff yesterday. There's tremendous financial exposure in that business of buying and selling that many homes.
Yep.
They have all gone on pause. All of the iBuyers, Zillow, Open Door, OfferPad, et cetera, Redfin's iBuyer business, they've all stopped buying homes. Um, what happens when that reopens? Nobody knows. Some people have suggested more people will want to buy a home with the click of a button rather than doing it in person. Others will say iBuyers are, going to be in real trouble because the model only works in a appreciating market. Who knows? But the model is going to be severely tested.
And I think the challenge is with these predictive or the AVM models, the automated valuation models, is that when you have high degrees of uncertainty, the models tend to struggle a bit in trying to give a good idea of what a house is worth. And as we've just been talking about with 20 odd million unemployed or growth in unemployed, people taking calorie cuts, there's a high degree of uncertainty over the next probably maybe up to 3 months, maybe longer. It's going to be hard for these models to give a good price for a house, the one that's going to predict enough to give that implied return they need to get for the whole model to work. So it's probably paused for quite a while.
You're right. And what's interesting about this crisis, as opposed to the Great Recession, which really started in housing in the States here, is that started in 2008 and unfolded really over the next 4 years before we started to see a recovery. There was data along the way that allowed those predictive models to accommodate. Here, we effectively had an asteroid slam into the economy very suddenly. And how does a model in a week, 2 weeks, 6 weeks account for that? It can't. What is your house worth? I have no idea.
Agree. It's impossible to work that out, and you wouldn't want to be an iBuyer today. And tomorrow, no. It's interesting because if you're Zillow, I was just thinking about this the other day. I mean, you've had to pivot your model from the dealing with agents and brokers and selling your premier agent, or I'm coming with a premier broker or premier agent model product, which seems to make a lot of money but cost a lot of money to make the money because of churn and just the sheer nature of the model. So you pivot into the iBuyer model. Now the iBuyer model hits the asteroid, or the asteroid hits the iBuyer model in this case. What do you do if you're them? Do you have any ideas, any thoughts?
Oh, that's the multi-billion-dollar question. I mean, look, Zillow got to over $1 billion in revenue, basically on an advertising model. They did Realtor.com 5 times better than Realtor.com did.
Yep.
And, they had sort of capped out there, built an amazing multi-billion-dollar business, but in the last 2 years, basically bet the company on this new model of buying and selling houses, literally getting into the transaction itself, which is a much larger market that carries significant financial risk. The effect of having that just stop has got to be, the strategy has been stopped in its tracks. I do think that Zillow, because it is a household brand here in the U.S., will probably come out of this the strongest in terms of iBuying. Open Door is a great company. They pioneered the model. They're operationally excellent, but they don't have 150 to 200 million consumers touching the brand every month. So if anybody's going to persist with this model coming out of this, I think it will be Zillow.
Yeah, I tend to agree. The question is, it's you pivot once a year ago. Now you might have to pivot again or do something slightly different.
Yeah.
I thought it was interesting watching the share price, where they announce the pivot into the iBuy model, the share price rockets up. They then pause it, or they then don't pause it and it goes down, and then they pause it and then it goes up again. So it's one of these strange things. You're rewarded for doing and then rewarded for not doing.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, Wall Street didn't really like the pivot, because it was so capital intensive and all of that stuff. And then when Zillow showed tons of revenue, which is
Yes.
pretty obvious, you're selling houses, right? Like Wall Street reacted, and
Yes.
I don't know. Look, I don't understand money, but I'm not sure that Wall Street has ever understood what iBuying is and isn't.
No, I've got a feeling it was literally the herd mentality. We're all going left. We all go left. We all go right. We all go right. And as long as I go left slightly before you, I'll make money. As long as I go right slightly before you, I'll make money.
Right.
You just don't want to be the last guy. You just don't want to be the last guy in the herd.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
You want to get left behind. So what are the Zillows, the Realtor.coms, et cetera, of the world doing for their customers?
Well, pretty quickly, I think Zillow was the first, maybe 3 weeks ago. I basically said we're going to cut prices to all of our agent advertisers.
Yeah.
I think it was 25%, something close to that. Realtor.com then a week later said we're going to cut prices for all of our agent advertisers for 30%. So I think they realized that they need to help these folks through. But what's interesting is what has been happening over the last year or so is that the big portals here, and there really are only two, Zillow and its satellite Trulia, and then Realtor.com, which is a distant number two now, have been moving to less of a paid advertising model. In other words, agents paying the portal to have their face on the website and the apps, to a referral or success fee model. Okay. So, meaning Zillow sends more business to fewer agents, and then they don't pay necessarily up front, but they pay on the back end upon closing a fee of 35% in their case. So it's interesting. This may just accelerate that change that had already been underway. Realtor.com a year and a half ago bought a company called OpCity, which basically works to scrub leads, and really was their entry into that business of sort of moving to a referral model rather than an advertising model. So I suspect that this crisis will accelerate that move.
Okay, and are they doing anything on the products or tools side to help? You talked before about how a lot of agents are now doing virtual tours, even though they might be physically walking around with an iPhone. But are the portals thinking about what other tools and products I can roll out to the agents in particular, so that they can become more efficient and effective in this social distancing or stay in place type environment?
Yeah, and I'm not sure about Realtor, but Zillow actually had come out about a year ago with a really strong video app, and agents doing their own 3D tours. So I think Zillow was well positioned, and I think that's just a matter of sort of pushing those existing tools. But what you see here is we have a huge sort of what we call the real estate tech vendor market here in the States. And gosh, there are so many options for, virtual tours and property videos. Like, there's no shortage of tools for an agent who wants to use that stuff.
And then, so when you think about this and you go, well, there's been a lot of changes, maybe some acceleration to some distant purchasing, buying sight unseen, which you said was historically only at the top end. What do you think the future looks like from US real estate perspective?
Well, that's a tough question. I think that what we're going to see is a obvious and severe dip. There's lots of talk about, are we going to have a V-shaped recession, or is it going to be a long trough? Nobody really knows. What I do know is that the housing market here will bounce back. It's resilient. And what I suspect that will look like when it does bounce back is that we will have a concentration of business within fewer hands, meaning the same number of agents probably, but I guess a smaller segment of those agents doing more of the transactions, and portals play a role in that, right? So a
Yes.
Zillow can take all of its demand that it's aggregating on its portal and in its
Yeah.
apps, direct that to fewer and fewer professionals that they
Yes.
partner. And I think this will accelerate that. So, which I don't think is a bad thing, right? We don't need in the States 1.4 million real estate practitioners. It's not necessary.
That's like, what does that work out to be? Like 5% of the population or something crazy?
Oh, it's crazy. Yeah. If you're in a crowd of more than 5 people, like, there's somebody who sells real estate in that crowd.
Yes. Yeah. So anyway, so it sounds like the future is going to be a little different. There's a way to go before we get there.
Yeah.
And it would be great to check in again with you in a few weeks just to see how things are progressing. Actually, I do have a question, right? Because you deal a lot with the broker levels. And I dialed in. You were chatting with Mark, so it must have been last week, maybe. I've lost track of my weeks now. Last week, interesting conversation. When that was an interesting conversation. When do you? What are the two or three key things that they're worried about at that big? Because he's a big broker. I think it was 2,000 or 3,000 agents he has. So it was,
yeah, 2,000 or 3,000 agents. Mark runs Compass in California, and was an independent brokerage before that. And I think they actually feel they're in a pretty strong position, as he said. They're now they made the cuts they needed to make. Now they're playing offense. And what's going to happen at the company level, I think, is basically a form of robust Darwinism. Okay, there are lots of
yes.
There are 80,000 real estate brokerage companies in the States, roughly. Lots of them aren't very profitable or very strong operationally. Many of them are. And we're going to see companies like Mark's probably gain a lot of market share and a lot of weaker companies dissolve. So the agents will stay, but they're going to gravitate towards fewer brokerage companies. The real estate brokerage model here in the US has been under strain for well over a decade, and this is just one more stressor on that model. So yeah, good companies will survive and get stronger. Lots of weaker companies won't make it through.
Yep. And when they think of market share, do they think of percentage of home sales within the target market, or do they think of the percentage of agents in the target market?
They don't think in terms of agents because there are so many of them. They think of percentage of home sales. Yeah. And the tricky thing is with so many agents, there are roughly, right, there were supposed to be close to 5.5 million transactions in the US,
Yes.
year last year. So those 5 million or so transactions are distributed across 1.4 million realtors, right? Nobody, that's terribly inefficient. So what brokers are trying to do is gather as much of that share as they possibly can within a group of good, productive agents. So that's how they view it.